was a winter's day 8 years prior when it happened. That solemn morning when she understood the value of life for the very first time. Her home was nestled on the side of a mountain. Around it was nothing but inhospitable wilderness. She had no neighbors or childhood friends to speak of. Things like traveling to school or playing outside were more trouble than they ought to be. Indeed, with its pure water and bright stars, it was a place rich with memories both frustrating and halcyon. That was only during summer, though. Winters in those mountains were extremely frigid, each morning more severe than the last. Her father would drive her to the train station after waiting 10 minutes for the engine to warm up and the iced over windows to clear. Mind starting up the car for me? Her father would savor his morning coffee, leaving her to venture outside and rev the engine. Out the front door she would go, traversing the garden with icy breath until she reached that old sedan. As always, she inserted the key, then started the ignition. The engine rumbled to life. Just as she proudly finished that humble task she'd done so many times before, a shrill scream pierced the air. She knew, even though it wasn't human, that the feeble sound was a cry of agony. A few moments passed. Her father came out and opened the hood of the car, creaking fan belts, a monstrous-looking engine, and something that didn't belong. There was a cat, a mother by the looks of it, and her two kittens. The three cats had been huddling for warmth in the engine's compartment. The mother cat was missing its head. One of the kittens had been mangled beyond recognition by the engine belts and surely died instantly. The other kitten, its face half covered in blood, panted faintly. It desperately clung to its mother, or rather the chunk of meat that was its mother, with the last bit of life it could muster. Poor things. Before I continue on, I just got a notification telling me that the game was installed, which is odd because if it wasn't, I don't know how I'd be able to be playing it in the first place, but more importantly, I already knew it was installed because I saw it after I downloaded it, so clearly in my notification bar in the home screen. So I don't know why. I just got an indication letting me know that the game was installed in the middle of me playing, or after I started playing it. But the other thing I want to mention is I started the audio kind of on the would-be title screen because the game, it really just started, like the game that's where it started, and I'm not sure if this next part I'm about to tell got captured, but it asked me to create a save file, and it kind of looked like it took me out of the game for a minute into another kind of alternate PlayStation-esque menu that I have never seen before, but maybe it's part of the game, but I'll just continue on. Her father lamented their plight. The previous night had been especially cold. After he had returned home yesterday, the cats must have snuck under the hood, drawn by the warmth of the engine. They had slept next to the engine and awoken to a storm of spinning belts. Cars in the 80s were not sealed particularly well, so this was not unheard of. It's okay. It wasn't your fault. Her father's voice seemed distant. She could only make out a small tuft of the kitten's gray fur. The rest of it was caked in the blood of its mother and brother. I can see its skull. The fragile life of a speckled kitten. Trembling and possibly blind, it continued to nuzzle against its dead mother's chest. Wait. She took the kitten into her arms and ran deep into the mountains to her grandfather's house. Was it because she was overcome with regret? Or was it the shock of grief? Years later, she still wasn't sure. Fighting back the welling tears, she burst into her grandfather's workshop. Her grandfather was a magician who could do anything. She had never seen magic. She knew that magic was a fantasy straight out of fairy tales, but so was her grandfather. She had to find him. He was the only one who could help. I suppose you want me to alter this kitten's fate? The cave-dwelling magician said indifferently. This kitten needs our help, she pleaded. Whether it was a simple task or a Herculean labor, her grandfather would not say. He simply granted the girl's childish wish like a machine. Oh no, the girl said. Before she knew it, however, she was holding a tiny corpse in her hands. Its fur was cold. The warmth of life had left its body, and the tears she had fought so hard to hold back poured from her eyes. Regret spread through her chest like an endless gray sky. We were too late. Some things cannot be undone. Her mind struggled to come to grips with what had just occurred. The last 10 minutes were a total blank. Who she met, what she had known, it was all as if it never happened. The only thing she was sure of was that life, once extinguished, can never return. Is somebody there? That day, it was her mistake that gave birth to me. Indeed, whatever occurred that day, it was a day of nostalgia and longing. This is the fairy tale of 8 years ago, the day they first met that no magic can ever bring back. Arrogant, greedy, and able only to destroy, I must be a wolf. I don't have regrets. There's no looking back. If my pride has left you behind, my sincere condolences. But at any rate, I suppose it's my fate to die at the hands of Little Red Riding Hood. It was a quiet morning. From her bed, she could see the sky was an ashen, watercolor gray. The thermometer displayed 43 degrees Fahrenheit, a rather unforgiving temperature for November. Her stomach woke her up with a growl, pathetically reminding her that she had completely missed breakfast. But lazy mornings like today's were, for her, a blessing. It was already well past 8 in the morning. On any ordinary weekday, tardiness would be unavoidable, but today classes were canceled in commemoration of the school's anniversary. Gratefully, she had every intention of taking it easy for the first time in ages. Outside the window was a gloomy gray, and it reminded her more of evening than morning. It wasn't a pleasant morning by any stretch of the imagination, but having been up all night until just 3 hours ago, she couldn't care less about the weather outside. All she cared about was more sleep. As long as she could spend her morning in bed, what was happening outside was of no concern to her. She shut the curtains, then closed her eyes and tried to let sleep reclaim her. I'd like a nice, uneventful dream for 2 hours. Thank you. Blissful slumber found her soon enough. Excuse me. Her consciousness faded. However, her simple request would be merciless. Excuse me. Her simple request would be mercilessly refused. Good Lord. A faint but shrill sound lingered in her ears. It was the unmistakable ring of a telephone. Much to her chagrin, out of habit, her eyes popped open. Oh, come on. Why today out of all days? The telephone was situated in the foyer on the first floor. Answering it meant walking down a 30-foot corridor and going down a flight of stairs. In her sleep-deprived state, that distance seemed somewhere between incredibly far and astronomically far. The phone's incessant ringing continued. She knew the caller would eventually give up if she ignored it, but she chose to fight the urge. Why doesn't Alice answer it? She thought her housemate would get it, but she soon had to abandon all hope. The realization struck that her housemate did not have the day off from school and was likely in class at her prestigious little hilltop academy. The caller proved incredibly persistent. That persistence made the volume of the ringing seem even louder. I'm trying to sleep here. She was left with no choice but to get up, throw a top on, and leave the room. God, it's cold. She rubbed her hands together to warm her numb fingers. The mansion's heating system was inadequate, to say the least, which meant that winter was the very worst of uninvited guests. Never more so than on a dreamy morning as this, when one didn't need to use a thermometer to know how cold it was. The mansion sat in the mountains and was surrounded by dense forests. Winter always arrived here first, before moving on to nearby towns. The robotic ring of the telephone reverberated throughout the long hallway. The mansion's furnishings had been so perfectly maintained that it made the place feel unlived. It seemed lonelier than it did splendid. Coupled with the dreary morning, it could have passed for a haunted house. Well, it is a haunted house, I suppose. It's too large for just the two of us. She counted more than 30 rings since it first began. The caller either had a lot of free time on their hands or had a good understanding of the house's circumstances. She had a strong hunch that it was the latter. The window above looked out onto a gloomy sky. She hastened to catch the unrelenting ring in the act as soon as possible, though she had a feeling that her happy morning might come to a close the moment she caught it. It was here that a series of incidents began. Apologies for the lack of romance to this tale, for whether it be objectively true or merely supposition, excuse me. It is always from gloomy and unassuming beginnings that extraordinary events are set into motion. The rain had subsided somewhat by the time she reached the school gate. Sunlight seemed to be playing peekaboo behind the clouds in the distance. It looked like it might be cleared up by early afternoon. Not that it has anything to do with me, though. The weather reflected her luck. On top of being forced out of the house at such an early hour, she had to suffer through a winter rain. I'm getting a bad feeling about this. The sinking feeling she had only grew as she passed through the entrance and headed inside. She didn't encounter any other students along the way, nor did she see anyone taking part in club activities either. The reception desk to the faculty room simply read "Faculty closed." The school had given all of its students the day off, except those explicitly summoned, like her, a fact that irked her more and more as the minutes passed. She opened the door to the faculty room and headed toward the desk she had visited a number of times before. The man at the desk wore a plain shirt and suit that were, nonetheless, neatly pressed. Slim framed glasses adorned his face, giving off an amicable yet cunning air. The mild-mannered image this mid-twenties man presented clashed with the cigarette he smoked. He didn't appear to have noticed her yet. Mr. Yamasiro? She closed the door with a bang. Showing no response to the sudden sound, Mr. Yamasiro lifted his head. Hey there. Good morning, Miss Ozaki. I guess this means you got the call. Yes. They called me at home about an hour ago, out of the blue. Having graduated from this high school himself, Mr. Yamasiro was not much older than the rest of the students. For that reason, the students preferred him over the other teachers. He always had something interesting to talk about and kept conversations casual. In fact, he seemed more like an older student than a teacher, but she unfortunately didn't share her fellow students' fondness for him. She was of the opinion that teachers should come across as more austere, like an iron fist that could inspire both love and hate in equal measure, not a buddy to joke and pal around with. He was the exact opposite of how she felt a teacher should be. It was only natural that her manner towards him would be forced and unfriendly. Not that she'd ever been wired to make friendly small talk. You're in a foul mood today. Today? I'm like this every day. The matter-of-fact answer perfectly matched the displeasure displayed on her face. Her bad mood from having to get up early and the tiredness from staying up late must have collectively made her look positively adversarial. If you say so, just go easy on our guest, okay? To be honest, we're not completely sure how to deal with him yet. About that, do you want to tell me what the hell is going on? Because I have no clue. As Mr. Yamasiro met her piercing eyes, he finally understood the reason behind her tone and slowly put out his cigarette. Let's start at the beginning. What did they tell you over the phone? just that I'd be introduced as a transfer student. They were a little hazy on the rest, though. One of Mr. Yamasiro's eyebrows stood up, impressed with the brevity of her answer. I guess that would be brevity, wouldn't it? He could see that she was angry, not because she had been called to school on her day off, but because she hadn't been told why she was here. Mr. Yamasiro chuckled sympathetically. If this was all a joke to you, perhaps I should just go home. Wait, I didn't mean to laugh. This is not a practical joke. We could really use your help. So there really is a transfer student. Yes, but he has, how should I put it, difficult circumstances. His name is Sojiro, and he's a bit, well, peculiar. So we thought someone around the same age would be best suited to show him the ropes. She threw him an unamused look. It was negligent of them to be pushing teaching duties on her, but she did wonder how exactly this transfer student was peculiar. Maybe he meant the student had behavioral problems or was difficult somehow. But peculiar? She didn't have the slightest idea what that meant. You don't hear a teacher call someone that every day. She had her doubts, but swept them aside for now. Excuse me. This wasn't the time to get distracted, but by more concerns. The fact remained that this conversation was all the peculiar she could handle, and she needed more information. She was already beginning to fantasize about saying no and curled up in her warm bed at home. I have a question. Yes? He's a second-year student like you. He's well-behaved and a good listener. He's not the most energetic individual, but that just means he'll be easier to get along with, right? He's not in the same homeroom class as you, but I'm sure you'll get along just... I'll be the judge of that when I actually meet him. And none of that answered my question. Why me? Though her tone was still stern, it was clear that she was willing to cooperate. She had decided to put her feelings of dissatisfaction aside and focus on the task at hand. Forcing herself to act empathetic in spite of her self-absorbed nature was something she was used to. Paradoxically, this force of will was also the reason her teachers put so much faith in her, to a point. At times, that strength shattered expectation, and on those occasions they were left with no choice but to treat it like a natural disaster and weather it until it passed. That was how Mr. Yamasiro had come to deal with her as over the past year. I'll ask you one more time, Mr. Yamasiro. Why does it have to be me? Pressured by a question without a clear yes or no answer, he answered, well, about that. You're probably thinking it's because you're the iron-fisted ruler of the student council and are willing to strike down both teacher and student for the good of the school, but you'd be wrong. I can't imagine any other reason you'd call me. Her eyes did nothing to hide her disbelief as she glared at him. Strength far beyond that of an ordinary 17-year-old girl, coupled with the youthful beauty of one. Mr. Yamashiro let slip a genuine smile, admiring the miraculous balance of qualities. I mean, I'd handle this myself if it was just about pure obligation, but who gets this job has nothing to do with whether they're a teacher or on the student council. I just felt that you were the only one who could entertain this kind of a request without needing to weigh all sides. That's why I insisted it be you. In other words, he knew she wouldn't say no. Mr. Yamashiro? Oh, dear. Would you stop glaring at me like that already? At least put on a smile for your new schoolmate. Look, if you're agreeing to help, we should go see him. We've already kept him waiting long enough as it is. And because you braved the rain to get here, I'd be happy to give you a ride home. Mr. Yamashiro stood up gracefully. I'm good, thanks, she replied, before turning and walking out of the faculty room. He had been waiting for about an hour. While he did, the rain shower lightened into a drizzle. His mind wandered as he listened to the sound of the raindrops. The room was filled with neatly arranged rectangular tables. He was the only one there. Quite some time had passed since he had brought to this room and asked to wait. Even the best behaved student might have grown dissatisfied or anxious with the situation by now, but the boy stuck to his spot like a scarecrow. He was chilled to the bone. It was the end of November, and the low temperature in the morning had marked the start of winter. The room was not much warmer. The heater hadn't been turned on. Either he'd missed the teacher telling him to turn it on, or he'd never seen one in his life. He breathed lightly on his freezing fingers as he aimlessly surveyed his surroundings. This dreary place was apparently a meeting room. The other students might have considered it a wonderful place to meet, but to him it was drab and overly spacious. It was a lifeless place that reminded him of an arid cave. Stuck in this cold room with absolutely nothing to do, his mind turned to what they wanted to discuss. Unable to come up with a solid answer, he returned his attention to the sound of the rain. The rain hardly resembled the rain in the mountains, though he could still recognize it barely. Its smell and sound were harsher, but at the end of the day, rain was still rain. So even this world, alien as it was, could have something in common with the mountains. That trivial detail perked him up a little. He liked how the town looked soaked in rain. Naturally, he preferred sunny weather, but he liked rain in its own way. The fog from the rain had soaked up the scent of the soil, and it reminded him of home. It was at times like these that he was able to numb the anxiety the city gave him. But then he let out a discouraged sigh. How pathetic. He'd already been there 2 weeks, and thoughts of his hometown still made him sad. Perhaps feeling like he was being unfair to his new life, he composed himself and continued to wait patiently. As if having a passion for distractions, his attention returned to the sound of the rain once more. Waiting like this didn't seem to be particularly hard for him. He quietly endured the numbing cold and the hour alone with calm, deep breaths. As the saying goes, good things come to those who wait. A strong point of his or not, he was astonishingly patient. Excuse me, sorry. It was certainly helping him out in this moment. She, on the other hand, was livid. The profile of the transfer student had been explained to her on her way to the meeting room. She was told that he lived his whole life up in the mountains without any electricity. That meant more than half of civilized society would have been an utter mystery to him. What a miserable level of isolation. How is this even possible in post-war Japan? He's like Robinson Crusoe. She had every right to be angry. His village had apparently remained isolated in the mountains for many years. Contact with villages in the foothills of the mountains only occurred once a month or so, which was unfathomable in modern Japan. Although expressways in Japan the old national railways now span the country like arteries, it wasn't entirely impossible for mountain villages like his to exist. But she couldn't imagine how someone born to such circumstances would think or live. When you say no electricity, you mean in general, right? Like, he must have had access to a public phone. Apparently not. He mentioned how shocked he was by the phones when he started living here. I kid you not, he said, wow, telephones are so useful. Couldn't really deny that, could I? She shot a sidelong glare his way as he laughed. It seemed that the naivety of the country boy had cheered up Mr. Yamashiro a bit. They probably didn't have police officers either. My family home is up in the mountains, so it's not inconceivable they wouldn't have electricity. But he doesn't even know what school is. Nope. He'd heard of them, but this is apparently his first time visiting one. Maybe that's why he's nervous. He wasn't very talkative. He's almost what would you call it? Feral? Like a boy raised by wolves. I suppose that makes us Lewis and Clark. Hey, you're scaring me, Ozaki. I was joking. Go easy, okay? And don't worry, I got the feeling from talking to him that he's a nice kid. He was almost like, I don't know, a cute little animal that doesn't speak human. Your jokes and metaphors aren't helping. As she gave her blunt reply, she tried to simulate in her mind what life without electricity would be like. but the thought of it took her sour mood from bad to worse. After all, it was a world she had never known. She could understand why the teachers had given up. She, too, wanted to give up and return to her warm bed, but her good-for-nothing pride was holding her hostage. Not only did the teachers believe she was up to the task, but she also believed she could do it. It wasn't that easy to go back on her word, no matter how bad things looked after that. She walked along the hallway, the rain pattering in the background. The meeting room was already in sight. With a furrowed brow, she fixed her long hair in anticipation of meeting the unknown stranger within. Her elegant strides were like those of a confident general going into battle. Aozaki, I believe in you and all, but I'll say it again. Be nice, okay? Can you at least try to smile? I'm bad at faking smiles, but I'll do my best. Really? That's a relief. I really mean it. It's good to know you're not good at everything. Mr. Yamasiro's shoulders slumped the second they reached the meeting room. As he put his hand to the door, his eyes seemed to say to her, "Be nice, please." This only made her more irritated. I already know I'm not the friendliest looking person in the world, but I can't just make myself smile at the drop of a hat. You should have asked Tobimaru if that's what you are after. She sighed about her social shortcomings, but then it occurred to her that being called into school on a day off while sleep deprived wasn't anything to smile about anyway. She also thought that the person responsible for this mess would be better off attending elementary school. It might not be his fault, but neither was it her duty or obligation to do the teacher's work for them. At the very least, they could have used their brains and organized all of this on a normal school day. Another complaint she wanted to voice later. I hate him already. He's my sworn enemy and I haven't even met him. Sorry, but I couldn't care less about his extenuating circumstances. You think this isn't awkward for me too? Honestly, why did this have to happen when I'm so busy? Her pounding headache from a lack of sleep had boosted her aggression by 10%. No matter how harmless the guy on the other side of the door may be, anyone who disturbed her sleep was the enemy. And just as she was reaching peak annoyance, Mr. Yamasiro opened the door to the meeting room. The room slowly slid into view. She didn't care for formalities, just looked straight ahead and stormed into the room, and found herself face to face with a most unusual opponent. Before we go on, let's see from another perspective. Turning back the clock a little. You don't have to do anything. For some, these words are a priceless luxury. For others, they are unbearable torture. For the proactive girl, it was definitely the former, though she'd be too suspicious of the motives of anyone giving her such a gift to accept it. For the passive boy, it was definitely the latter, a bitter thorn that made him homesick, though at this very moment his mind was still distracted with the wait for his face to reveal any discontent. He maintained perfect posture as he stared at the gray sky. He had already waited a whole hour, but figured they must have had their reasons for making him wait. And as long as he had the sound of the rain to soothe him, he could keep on waiting. It must be 9 o'clock already. Yeah, that seems about right. He had been vaguely keeping track of the time as he listened to the rain. Due to the holiday, the school building was completely silent, except for the patter of the rain on the window. The mood felt as damp as the air. It was then he heard the heavy clatter of footsteps approaching. Finally, I thought they'd forgotten about me. He could hear 2 sets of footsteps, one heavier set belonging to an adult. He breathed a sigh of relief as the door slid open. So sorry to keep you waiting. The first person he saw was a man wearing glasses and an awkward smile. That's Mr. Yamashiro, the one who brought me here. Hey, where's Mr. Seito Naka? I told him to keep you company. He shouldn't have left you here. Mr. Yamashiro scratched his head, looking increasingly apologetic, and then, from behind, with a tight-lipped expression that made it clear she didn't want to be there, a dark-haired girl with a determined look in her eyes approached. Or appeared, I'm not sure. Clicked off too fast. Sojiro gulped. The sound of the rain on the window faded into nothingness. That's when he knew. This was how it felt when time stood still. She blinked quickly a few times as if taken aback. Why was anyone's guess? The boy was everything she expected a naive country boy to look like. However, she felt something she couldn't understand. His eyes widened slightly as if taken aback. The reason was obvious. Putting his feeling into words was a different matter altogether, so we will never know exactly what he experienced in that moment. That's when it hit him. He sensed he'd been touched by the hands of destiny. Allow me to introduce the 2 of you. This is the transfer student I mentioned, Sojiro Suzuki. And this is the girl that will be showing you around. She's our student council president and came in on her day off just to welcome you. Her name is Aoko Ozaki. His voice and the sound of the rain seemed distant. This is how they first met. Such was their start, for better or worse, like the ephemeral beauty of fireworks. It was commonly believed among the students that Alko was always in a foul mood. But this gossip was 90% prejudice, as Alko simply didn't have time to be irritated 24/7. The reality was she simply didn't want to explain herself all the time, and therefore seemed angry about something, obvious or not. This idle gossip did, however, lead to her earning the title of one the school's This idle gossip did, however, lead to her earning the title of one the school's 7 deadliest threats. The remaining 10% of the gossip was right on the mark. Alko herself often had the feeling that her tendency to feel animosity towards harmless things was akin to what a chronic headache sufferer might experience. Today fell under that 10%. For today her anger was pure, and her childish and selfish display was befitting of her actual age. The meeting room was dimly lit, awash in the colors of the rain. To reduce electricity costs, school regulations forbid the use of lights during the day. This was the setting the three of them found themselves in. Her first impression was that his calm demeanor reminded her of a field of wild flowers. In spite of his perfect posture, he seemed subdued and frail. And though describing him as meek would be going too far, at the very least he was passive. Even through his uniform, she could see that he was thinner than average. His dark hair was unkempt, and he came across as a wholly forgettable boy. If she had to look at him in a more positive light, she would describe him more a young man than a boy. It was his calm demeanor that made him seem more mature. Was that the cause of Alko's reasonless reaction? He seemed almost too at home in the meeting room, and she was left with the impression that it was her and the teacher, not this outsider, who were the guests here. She felt an unidentifiable aggravation building within her, almost as if her right to be here was in question. Alko felt herself raising her natural defenses. What's with me? Am I really this angry for no reason? She hated not understanding things, her emotions in particular. It pained her less than you would imagine for a perfectionist like her, but it still nagged her like a thorn in her side. Ha 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 ha. Aozaki, why don't you introduce yourself? Mr. Yamasuro's attempt to relieve the tension was equally irritating. Introduce myself, huh? After casting a nasty glance in the teacher's direction, Alko turned to face the boy. From an outsider's perspective, it might have looked like a stare down. And in that instant, the culmination of her emotional state hurtled toward the innocent boy and skewered him. Again, sorry for the wait, Suzuki. Hearing his name, Sojuro came to his senses. His stunned gaze shook loose. He took a deep breath to clear his mind. Chalking it up to nerves, Mr. Yamashiro broke out a smile and turned to the girl standing beside him. I'll do the introductions then. This is the transfer student, Sojiro Suzuki. And this is our student council president who came in on her day off just to show you around. Her name is Aoko Aozaki. Having been introduced by Mr. Yamashiro, the girl took a step forward. Her eyes were merciless. Her stare, an unspoken threat to violently trample her opponent. Sojiro, on the other hand, managed to keep his own composure despite the shock at how confrontational she appeared. He had never been greeted quite like this before, but supposed, mistakenly, that this was how people treated each other in the city. The exchange must have looked quite dramatic to an onlooker. A girl ready to brawl, an earnest country boy desperate to understand. It was a murderous limbo, especially for anyone in the room with them. Like Mr. Yamashiro, for example. While he had thought he had made the right decision in choosing an honor student to help him out, she was in an inexplicably bad mood, and the tensions in the air was undeniable. It was at this moment that he realized his failure. His realization had come far too late. One false move, and this girl, for whom no problem was too large, would become a storm that would rock the very foundation of the school. Just as the almighty Joker card could bring either fortune or disaster, the sole teacher who had been present at the time would come to bear the blame for the scandal that ensued. I'm going to do that. See something real quick. Okay. Wow. You two really seem to have hit it off. I suppose I can leave you two to it then? Mr. Yamashiro laughed nervously as he crept toward the door. I'll be in the faculty room. Stop by when you're finished. You'll be alright, won't you, Ozaki? You're the student council president. Don't let me down. Mr. Yamashiro left, leaving the two in a locked-eyed state, one in which one set of eyes was doing all the glaring. All that remained in the room was a naive boy and a cross-armed, guarded girl. The two lingered in silence. They resembled shogi players agonizing over their first moves, though ultimately it was only Aoko that had considered the scene that carefully. She decided to put her irritation aside for the time being. With no reason to feel revulsion for him in the first place, she sighed deeply and faced Sojiro. Whatever. It's not like this is the first time that Mr. Yamashiro landed me in it. So, what's your name again? Her tone was nothing if not reproachful, though he had done nothing to offend her. But the boy failed to pick up on it, incapable of such venom himself. I'm Sojiro Suzuki, he replied. And you're Miss Ozaki, right? For whatever reason, he came across as happy in his response. Drop the miss. That's not my style. Is Suzuki fine? What do you mean? What do you mean, what do I mean? Hello? Did I say something weird? Yeah, very. The boy replied immediately as if it was a natural response, but quickly second-guessed himself. Never mind. It must be normal here. You can call me Suzuki. You mind if I call you Ozaki? Suit yourself. She followed her blunt reply with a swift turn away from him. While she was hardly thrilled at the prospect of the task at hand, it had been entrusted to her, and it was her personal policy to see it through to the end. Sorry, but I'm not in the mood for pleasantries. Time is short, so let's get this over with. Sure, I know your time is valuable. Alco's blunt rancor was lost on him once again. Humans tend to be overly conscious about being ignored, whatever form that takes. But despite being peeved at landing none of her attacks, Alco did her best to act professional and directed her guest into the hallway. There was no sunlight in the hallway, nor any sign of life. This was more like a prison than the cave that was the meeting room. As it dawned on Alco that the hallway matched her mood, she sighed once again. First things first, did you understand everything that Mr. Yamashiro explained to you? Yes, I get how the school works. But it's still a bit hard to imagine that everyone here is around the same age. I see. Great. Alco rubbed her forehead. This Sojiro kid had no idea what he was in for. Apparently, all he'd heard about school was that it was a place where a lot of people meet to study. High school teachers imparted to students their knowledge in various fields of study, while fostering discipline and creativity. But never did Alco imagine that she would have to explain the concept of school itself to someone. Yes, fundamentals were important, but this was absurd. She had serious doubts whether she could even handle classes, but Mr. Yamashiro insisted that things would work out somehow. Sojiro had managed to pass the transfer exam, after all. Barely. Not my problem. Alco grumbled mentally as she walked down the hallway. She consoled herself with the fact that today would be the only day she'd spend with this boy at a time. Or at least she tried to keep it that way. Ozaki? He asked calmly, trying to get her attention. What? Can I ask you something? Yes. What is it? I could be wrong about this, but you seem upset about something. You're not a morning person, are you? His gaze revealed earnest concern, as if asking her if she remembered to eat breakfast. It was like another hammer to her head. It was true that Alco had been glaring at Sojiro the entire time. Glaring red-hot daggers, in fact. Not just at him, but the universe. Even on her best days, her roommate used to remark, "Most people can't handle your scowl, Alco. It wouldn't hurt you to be a little more tolerant." She'd been warned that her emotions were so naked on her face that people treated her like a powder keg. How naive could the boy be that he could not pick up on this? "He's not making fun of me, is he?" No, he couldn't be. Even she found her own attempt to reassure herself unconvincing. It began to dawn on Alco, far too late, that compared to her, this laid-back transfer student might as well have been from another planet. Look, let me spell it out for you, because you're just not getting it. It's not your imagination. I am angry, and anyone could see that in my eyes. It's easier than trying to make conversation. In response to her words, the Martian clapped his hands together. That makes sense. I don't know why you'd want to do it that way, but I get that it's a faster way to express yourself. Sojuro accepted her reasoning without argument, though he still had no idea what kinds of emotions she was trying to express. It was as if he could hear the words but didn't grasp the meaning. Ideas that should have connected were instead separated into blocks. So it's true, he really is peculiar. Mr. Yamasiro's words made sense to her now. What was odd about this boy went way beyond naivety. A stranger in a strange land he may be, but it was only civilized to forgive him some jet lag induced confusion. Let's visit your classroom. She had regained her composure. Sojuro raised his hand and stopped in his tracks. Just one more thing. Alco waited for Sojuro to continue. The boy was patient to a fault. She rubbed her forehead with her hand again, nursing a vague feeling of uneasiness. I wanted to ask, why are you so angry? Is it your line of business, or does it run in your family? A long silence. Though she knew it wouldn't change the situation, she remembered her regret at answering the phone that morning. He meant no harm. She repeated this thought like a mantra in an attempt to keep her impulses in check. It's not you, if that's what you're worried about. I'd just rather be somewhere else right now. With that vague answer, she started to walk again and turned her gaze away from this rude stranger named Sojuro Suzuki. While what constitutes normal is certainly up for debate, most would undoubtedly refer to him as so. He was a simple and nice boy with nondescript features. If he were an ice cream flavor, he would be vanilla. And Sojuro found Alco to be very businesslike and full of life. There was a certain purpose to her movements as they began and ended in an orderly fashion. The way her finger raised when she pointed at things. The way she made her way across the hallways and classrooms. The way she would occasionally glance back at him to make sure he was keeping pace. Each and every moment was so impressive that he couldn't take his eyes off of her. Alco showed him to his classroom. Alco showed him to his homeroom, Class C of the 11th grade. The room certainly displayed more of a human touch than the previous meeting room, but Sojuro was none the wiser as to its function. Alco gave a brief explanation before they visited individual subject classrooms, as well as the gym, cafeteria, locker, and school infirmary. Sojuro asked so many questions that much time passed before they reached the AV room on the second floor. Oh dear. Sojuro stopped, looking genuinely concerned. It's 20 to 1 already. Huh? You're kidding, right? This school isn't that big. We'll be done soon. The tour had begun around 10, which meant that 3 hours had passed. The tour of the school shouldn't take anywhere near this long. Maybe if you didn't ask so many questions, we'd be done by now. It's a miracle it's still light out. Alco glared at Sojuro. She was being sarcastic, of course, knowing full well he would never pick up on it. Is he? To her surprise, he looked down, apologetically unable to hide his dejection. Oops, I think I broke him. The guy before her now was nothing like earlier. In contrast to seeing his once impenetrable veneer when they first met, she found herself feeling sympathetic. Momentarily, at least, until her irritation returned in full force. What's the hurry? Don't tell me your brain's not big enough to remember all this stuff. Well, there's that. But it's more about it almost being 1 o'clock. Sojuro's gaze wandered as if worried about something. If he was worried about the weather, he would have a hard time seeing it as there were no windows in this hallway. Don't tell me you've got somewhere to be. Actually kind of reads more like don't tell me you've got somewhere to be. That's perfect. I take time out of my day for you, and you don't have the decency to even hang around. You're a real piece of work. You know that? Thanks. I guess that's nice of you to say. Not a compliment. She yelled at him, unable to hold back her fury. Well, what? What's happening in 20 minutes? Sojuro's face lit up as he finally understood what she was asking him. It's a secret, he said with a perfectly straight face. Every time I think I've got this guy figured out, he finds a way to trip me up. Her frustration was natural. Still, she did everything she could to stifle her feelings and fake a smile. You want to repeat that, Suzuki? She took a step forward. Like I said, it's a secret. Feeling the mood change drastically, Sojuro took a step back. And another. No matter how many steps he took back, she kept edging towards him. She was smiling, but he thought he could see the blood boiling beneath her skin. Last question. Do you enjoy mocking me? He had no intention of mocking her, though at this point he doubted presenting any evidence to prove this would do much to erase that forced smile on her face. Let me explain. His arms raised in surrender. She halted her advance and freed her face from that unseemly smile. The truth is that my part-time job shift starts at 1, but students aren't allowed to have jobs, right? Yeah. Wait. Were you being tight-lipped because you thought you'd get in trouble? All you have to do is get permission, dweeb. I know, and I did. I got permission when they accepted me to the school. Really? Aoko's face lit up as she realized he might not be the piece of work she thought him to be. Yet, but I only got permission for one of my jobs. Wait, you have more than one job? Well, I quit 2 of them. Living expenses are bad enough, but now I have to earn money for school as well. Don't you think it's unreasonable to them to only let me work one job? No, I think you're the one who's being unreasonable. Though still irritated, her opinion of him changed a little. She was impressed that he was able to take care of his tuition and living expenses all on his own. She could also empathize with having no time to oneself. Her anger began to subside. The words part-time job were about the last thing she ever expected to hear out of this country boy's mouth. Well, you gotta do what you gotta do, I guess. It's fine. You can go. I get it. Will you be okay? She had no idea what his question meant, but she at least understood he was trying to be considerate, which also took her by surprise. She figured he'd be just as dense about people's feelings as he was about everything else. I'll be fine. I'll just head home. First, though, she thought it best that they both stop by the faculty room. Mr. Yamashiro had mentioned that the transfer procedures had already been completed, so all that remained was for him to sign off on her duties. I finished showing him around. Great job. That goes for you too, Suzuki. What did you think of our school? Thank you for the tour. It's like a real school. Ha 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 ha. That's great to hear. Okay, then. Best of luck starting tomorrow. She had no interest whatsoever in this pointless wrap-up meeting. You'll have to forgive Mr. Yamashiro. He likes the faculty room so much he chooses to kick back there while getting his students to do his dirty work for him. I bet he spends hours in there. Actually, that's pretty smart of him. Okay, Ozaki, if you're fine with it, then so am I. Huh? There it was again. Whatever Sojiro was getting at, Aoko had no idea. I'm going to get going. Thanks again for today. Yes, today. Today only. She shooed him away with her hand. His face bent into a broad smile as if he found the gesture endearing. It was a softer expression than she had grown accustomed to seeing out of him. It was the kind of smile that would make anyone smile back. Well, most people at least. Aoko Ozaki didn't betray the slightest hint of a smile. See you later. Huh? And With that friendly farewell, Sojiro walked toward the end of the hallway, or so she thought before he turned into the next class over. Did he just... Sojiro headed straight for one of the classroom's window. Sojiro headed straight for one of the classroom's window, whereupon he opened it with ease. The chilly November air filled the room as the soft sounds of the rain doubled in volume. In that instant, she realized his intention with opening the window. She really wished she hadn't. No, stop. He already had one leg out the window when she dashed to stop him. What do you think you're doing? What am I doing? I'm leaving for my job. That's what. You do know that this window isn't an exit, don't you? I mean, do you even know what floor you're on? She saw the light of an understanding dawn in his eyes. Oh my God, I almost died. Who would put an exit here? This is dangerous. It's the lack of something between your ears that's dangerous. Her insult went right over his head. People here don't normally enter and exit through windows, okay? You should probably remember this information for future reference. Oh, I know. I just wanted to save some time. But thanks. I'll be more careful from now on. He pulled his leg back inside and closed the window. The school uniform was soaked wet from the rain. Hey, be my guest. Go outside anyway. You like. Just don't do it in front of me from now on. Just don't do it in front of me from now on. Anyway, you start school tomorrow, right? Yeah. I'm a little nervous though, which is why I came in early for the tour. He bid her farewell before running away down the hallway. She hoped he would walk down the stairs and leave through the school entrance like a normal person. I wonder if he's really going to be okay here. The image of him disappearing into the distance popped into her head in spite of her ire. She had no intention of spending any more time with him, and yet she felt strangely anxious. She couldn't tell if the feeling was fueled by concern or irritation. Why had she even got angry with this significant transfer student in the first place? A strange day with a strange transfer student resulting in strange emotions. Her head tilted as she reflected on what should have been a more enjoyable day than the irritating experience she just had. Whatever. It's not as if I'll see him again. The sound of the rain echoed quietly all around her. The gray sky seemed frozen in time. It was impossible to discern whether it was morning or evening. Mr. Yamashiro and Aoko were likely the only ones left at the school. The unlit classroom looked overly gloomy and ominous as Aoko stood in it alone. She pulled up her left sleeve. Her dainty, unremarkable watch showed that it was almost 1 o'clock. He was right about the time. She looked out the window at the grounds below. She saw a boy in uniform running through the rain without an umbrella, a sight she must have seen before, but for whatever reason, affected her far more than she wished. Alco did not stop by the faculty room before heading home. While Mr. Yamasiro's offer to drive her home was tempting, she decided it would ultimately be far more satisfying to ruin his day just as he had hers. She walked quietly as she could towards the entrance and opened her bright red umbrella. As she had predicted that morning, the rain was waning in the afternoon. At this rate, it would probably cease completely in an hour or so. The distant sunshine would likely have reached her by the time she arrived home. Well, I suppose it could be worse. She shrugged her shoulders in resignation. She neither liked nor disliked rain, but she found herself enjoying her walk home with her red umbrella in hand. The teachers at Misaki High School weren't fond of bright colors, so Alco's red umbrella was an unusual sight. A ghost story about how the umbrella was once pure white had been making the rounds, but it featured Alco instead of a ghost. It was with that umbrella that she had made her way toward Misaki Station. The private Misaki High School got its name from the town of the same name. The area was once a sprawl of farmland and woodland, but rapid growth over the last 10 years had led to unprecedented modernization. There were some who fought to preserve Misaki's natural treasures. I agree in principle to preserving the land, but not at the expense of our prosperity. With those words, the mayor snuffed out the voices of the minority and ushered in a long-term plan for new urban development. More than enough funds for the urban development were collected, and the unassuming town of Misaki became the largest municipality of Misaki City in merely 10 years. Even though it lacked the modernity of neighboring Yashirogi or the elegance of Misaki Hills. What did people expect? To keep the town hidden atop the mountain forever? It's not like they were gonna flatten the mountain or something. Urbanization had been contained to the lowlands around the station, with most of the hills and mountains still standing as they did 10 years prior. The exhaustion of funds succeeded in protecting the old Misaki where the citizens could not. It became a truly odd suburban town, welcoming an increasingly urban population with its vestiges of old country charm. Misaki High School was a private school established long before the town's current state. The original campus, built 50 years ago, was located high up in the mountains, making its current location its second incarnation. The path to the old grounds was remote, steep, and also well trodden by animals. For these reasons, among others, Misaki High School had been shuttered until almost 20 years ago, when it received a donation from a department store chain that allowed for the construction of a new campus in the city, and thus Misaki High School reopened its doors, the old woodland campus forgotten. In fact, Most of the students attending Misaki High School were not from Misaki at all. The hardy rustic people of this country town preferred prefectural schools to private ones. Truth be told, Alko herself was one of them. All she had wanted after junior high was to move to Tokyo, where she hoped to spend her days enjoying live music on her way to entering a public university. But her hopes were dashed with her sister's departure, so here she was, walking alone in a town with only a red umbrella to keep her company on what should have been a day off. Looking back on it now, it's like my whole life has been one disaster after another. Her frustration evaporated into the cold December air. Oh well, at least it's not boring. With those words, her mood brightened a bit as she left the school in her wake. The busier part of the town met her at the bottom of the gently sloping road. Misaki's train station was brand new. Once looking no prettier than an abandoned factory, it had been renovated into a multi-purpose structure with huge department stores on its east and west sides. When the department stores first opened, Alko and her friends had been impressed with their modern feel, but in time, the stores too became dated. She had no shopping to do today, so she passed them by. What she really wanted to do was rest at a cafe, but she fought the urge, knowing her roommate would never let her hear the end of it if she frittered away her money. She looked back and blinked. For just a moment, she could have sworn she had seen someone suspicious in a red dress out of the corner of her eye. Huh. It must have been her imagination. The sixth sense chill she was experiencing down her spine was a familiar one at this point. She continued to walk home, brushing off the event as if it never happened. As if it had never happened. In time, the chill faded, and all that was left was the sounds of the town. She sighed heavily. Had she imagined it? Even if it had all been in her head, she was far more comfortable with the feeling that still lingered. Even mosquitoes have the grace to buzz off eventually. She grumbled under her breath. Whether good or bad, this too shall pass, so the saying goes. Yeah, I've got enough on my plate as it is. Fortunately, summer and bugs go hand in hand. She could see how bugs could be drawn to all the sweet fruit. Rank with grease and heat, the kitchen was closed for the time being. The lunch rush had come and gone. But one last battle remained, dinner time. Only after the evening chaos could the kitchen crew remove their white armor and call it a day. In the midst of the war zone was a lone newcomer. Do I have to wear this? His voice was uneasy, betraying how new he was. I know how you feel, man. I feel the same. Unfortunately, it's the boss's orders, so you'll have to suck it up, okay? The future of this shopping arcade is at stake, apparently. I really hate to ask, but the rain has stopped, so would you mind going out for me? Get back in one piece, and I'll buy you dinner. His bright orange co-worker clasped his hands together as if to beg for forgiveness as he saddened him with this unreasonable task. "10 years ago, Misaki City was a town of farm and woodland. But everything had changed. The front of the station was now lined with tall multi-story buildings, and the residential areas were similarly full of apartment complexes. The once rustic scenery around the station had long become a thing of the past. Shiro Inuzuka was the one place in the city that still contained vestiges of the old town, vestiges of the old town, a pocket of the past inside an urban jungle. The road extended up a conspicuously high hill to an old residential district far from the hustle and bustle of the train station. Long ago, it had been considered unwise to build on high ground, so nobody lived above a certain elevation. Shiro Inuzuka, sitting as it did atop the hill in the middle of town, was no exception to that convention and had no residences to speak of. The asphalt continued for some time, eventually giving way to a mountain road that was swallowed into the cover of trees. A lone vending machine stood to mark the boundary between town and beyond. Even the children knew that there was nothing beyond the new playground and development that so enthralled them. Well, that was not entirely true. There was nothing besides the haunted house. Aoko Aozaki traversed the long slope. Below her, she could see the whole of Misaki. The symmetrical town looked like a miniature set from this height. It would look like a painting if there had been a sea next to it, but unfortunately, Misaki City was very much landlocked. While it was overcast at the moment, the scene was quite breathtaking on clear evenings. The view was the one thing that made the arduous climb worthwhile, and today she had been denied even that. I'd cycle home if it wasn't for this rain. Even a bus route would be a fine thing. Aoko had been using this road to get to school for almost 2 years now, but the journey had never gotten easier. Oh, it's locked. I guess Alice isn't back yet. With a wary shrug, she put her hand on the rusty iron fence. Quietly, the heavy gate swung open as if to welcome her home. There sits atop that hill a haunted house. That is how the story much shared around town used to begin. But fresh rumors about the house had sprung to life almost as fast as the town's modernization. Despite being dilapidated and abandoned for many years, lights can be seen inside the house at night. An angry murder of crows often gathers atop the hill before mysteriously vanishing. Children get lost in the fog, never to be seen again. Late at night, a shrieking sound can be heard all the way to town. This particular piece of slander was the one Alco wished to discredit the most. The final rumor was of an eye-catching luxury car that sometimes made its way up and down the hill. The rumors spread and grew by the day, and while they grew, the house that everyone thought had rotted away was restored over the recent years. Deep in a wood on top of a hill no one dared to approach. Like a ruin, shrouded from view even on the brightest of days, stood a relic out of time, a building from a fairy tale. The house was the Koanji mansion. Everyone in town knew about the witch's house on the hill. The unabashedly haunted house where Alko Azaki resided for reasons unknown. Needless to say, it was not really haunted. The Koanji family home was a grand Western-style mansion with a long and storied history stretching all the way back to England. It was too small to be a dormitory, yet too big to be called a house. The main building contained as many as 3 normal houses worth of rooms and was surrounded by a large and all-encompassing courtyard. The perimeter of the grounds was surrounded by a high iron fence covered in thorny vines. There was also an annex to the main building. Given such extravagance, it was no wonder that it inspired rumors. To the town residents, the mere existence of such a lavish and out-of-place mansion on top of the hill was a cause for suspicion. Rumors, lies, and slander were the prices to be paid for fame. With only 2 lodgers, it was hard to disagree with the perception that vampires must be living here. Well, I know I'm not one, but Alice. She put her hand on the front door. It was a grand double door that would have paired well with a brass lock, and yet it was secured with little more than a simple keyhole. Pushing it open with one hand, she entered the supposedly haunted house. And by the way, if vampires were not enough to scare you, ghosts were also known to appear on certain nights. Much like the weather outside, the foyer was overcast with shades of gray. Perhaps by deliberate design, the architect had chosen not to include any lights in the entrance area. The ceiling was 2 floors high. The only light in the room came from the skylight. It was particularly gloomy on rainy days. On moonless nights, it was like the world itself ceased to be. Alco decided the drawing room to the east would be a good place to rest, but knowing that she would not be able to relax until she changed clothes, she darted up the stairs. The stairs curled up the wall to the second floor hall. There was a third floor attic as well, accessible from the far end of the hall. She had never set foot in there in the 2 years she had lived there. She had lived here, though. She had never set foot in there in the 2 years she had lived here, though. The Kwanji mansion was more or less divided into two wings, east and west. Alko had been given the entire east wing, but 2 rooms were more than enough as far as she was concerned. She had no desire to open a door that would trap you in a storybook world or lead to an attic that had only been used for storage these last 5 years. Alko's room was at the end of the east wing's long corridor. She had elected for a smaller room for no other reason other than that she thought it would be easier to clean. It was furnished with a large bed, her beloved mahogany desk, a wardrobe and chest for her clothes, and 2 9-bookshelf cases. That is all she brought with her from home. Her entire life of 16 years reduced to this. Hold on. Excuse me, sorry. I'm trying to reposition myself. She borrowed the next room down for her own purposes. Oh yeah, I should check on the watchtower I got from Alice. She needed to see if the project she had been working on all night had been born. She needed to see if the project she had been working on all night had borne fruit. The study next door served as proof of life she had been living for the last year, and how different life was from the one she had lived before. It was not a room for the person she had been. It was a room for the person she would eventually become, a place of solitude that only she could enter, or so she thought. Wow. Not only did it break, it vanished without a trace. Looks like I've still got a long way to go. Go ahead, laugh it up, Robin. The nosy neighbor that had intruded upon her sanctuary flew away. While not exceptionally talented, Alko did not lack for effort and was not afraid to fail. One could have almost mistaken her approach for optimism. She changed out of her uniform and returned to the first floor. Down the stairs, she opened the door to the east wing into the corridor, as dark as a cellar. The absence of windows meant it was pitch black without the lights on, so she flicked the switch and entered the nearby doorway. Life without electricity, I don't even want to imagine it. It had been her idea to update the drawing room. The walls were decorated with extravagant patterns, and around the room were large, majestic sofas and a luxurious Persian rug. Amidst it all was a 30-inch television that seemed completely out of place. It stood looking over the other furniture like the emperor with no clothes. The mansion's owner would have rather done without it, but to a commoner like Alco, it was an essential commodity. They had fought over its presence at first, but eventually came to an agreement and now mutually enjoy this modern comfort. Guess I'm one to talk. I came from a pretty traditional household myself. Now, in a somewhat pleasant mood, she decided to brew some tea. She boiled some water in the kitchen, prepared the teapot, and made herself some black tea. With a flop, she sank into the sofa. She took a sip of her tea, then another. Lulled by the tickling of the clock, excuse me, lulled by the ticking of the clock, she took a third sip as she pondered how to spend her afternoon. The sofa almost seemed to be inviting her, and she sunk even further into its comforting embrace. Alco blearily opened her eyes as she lifted her body up from the cushions. This was no dream or delusion. At some point, a girl had sat down across from her. Not the least bit surprised, she reached for her teacup, but the tea within had gone completely cold. Did I doze off? She asked the question to the girl on the other side of the table. Yes, the girl answered without lifting her gaze. When silent, she could have been mistaken for a beautiful doll. The girl sitting on the opposite sofa was reading an old book. She had delicate limbs and pale white skin. Not a hint of humanity emanated from her melancholic aura. She had darker hair than Alco, and her icy eyes were focused on the pages in front of her. Her clothes resembled that of a nun, but were actually her school uniform. In Alco's humble opinion, the gloominess suited her. She evoked something like out of a painting. There was something unreal about her, as if she were frozen in time. The white of her neck was so lovely that even Alco found herself enchanted by it. The girl was one of the haunted house's 2 residents. Her name was Alice Kuwanji, and she was the same age as Alco. How long was I asleep? At least an hour. You'll catch a cold if you keep sleeping here. Alice answered indifferently, not that it bothered Alco, who was now used to it. She looked at the clock on the wall and saw that it was already 7. She had been asleep for 2 hours. The day had been a rough one for her, and she had slept little the night before, so it was no surprise that she had dozed off for as long as she had. You could have woken me up. Now my tea is cold. It was already cold by the time I got here. I'm sure it was. I'm just saying. Alko drank down the rest of the cold tea in one gulp. In the poorly heated Kawanji mansion, that was more than enough to clear her head and wake up. Nothing quite beats this tea, not even the expensive kind from Britain. Anyway, welcome home, Alice. The universe seems determined to keep me from even the occasional luxury without you. What is it about today? Is it just my luck, or what? At this rate, I'm due a temple visit just to be safe. Alko shrugged her shoulders as if resigning herself to her fate. Something happened? After 2 years together, they knew each other quite well. Alko had one way of asking questions. Alright. And Alice had another. Alice asked without raising her head, and Alko gave her the details. I should start by apologizing. The project I was working on all night was a total failure, and even though I only took my eyes off it for a second, it must have boiled over and been destroyed. Though I'll add that I shuffled the circulation codes as a precaution. Alko tried to laugh it off as if it was someone else's problem. And something came up this morning, and I was called into school. They made me show this transfer student around, and it took up my whole day. By the time I got back, it had vanished without a trace. You're not mad, are you? Hardly. If I got mad every time you broke something, there would be no end to the fighting. I have more materials, so can just start over. So you can just start over. However, aren't you really the one who's angry? Alice was very much on point today. It was true that despite outward appearances, Alko was seething with frustration. That aside, I'm sorry. Sure enough, the transfer student I mentioned earlier was a real piece of work. He's been living deep in the mountains and has literally zero common sense. I know people say that the mountains are like an entirely different world, but I had no idea how true it was. Alice raised her head in response to hearing her name. But Alko kept going on before she could get a word in edgewise. Alco, after all, expected no sympathy in the first place. We didn't get along well from the start, but things really took a turn for the worse when I took him to a classroom. He apparently thought it was a place where you get one on He apparently thought it was a place where you'd get one-on-one tutoring. And that's not all. I mean, you're never going to believe this. What do you think he asked when I politely explained what a classroom is to him? But then, what are the other classrooms for? Unbelievable, right? I mean, a classroom is a classroom. And no matter how vague or unhelpful anything I said was, he just kept nodding. It's like he was just taking everything at face value. I don't know if he just lacks an imagination or never uses it. Anyway, he at least seemed to grasp most of what I said to him the first time around. I suppose he's not a complete idiot. It's rare to see you so judgmental. Is it really worth getting worked up over someone like that? I couldn't care less about him. I'm just worried he'll screw up somehow. What she was really worried about was having to clean up that mess if and when it happened. That had to be it. If not, it would mean that she had no real idea why she could not get him out of her head. Well, he was a weirdo, alright. You two would probably hit it off great. Another world in the mountains doesn't sound so bad. But from her eyes, it was clear that the question of whether they would get along was irrelevant, given that they would never meet in the first place. Alco gave a non-committal response. Anyway, what have you been reading? A book about spiritual evolution based on the spiritual diary. Swedenborg, huh? Is that really worth reading again? I wouldn't bother if it were the original, but this is a knockoff. It exaggerates the pros and cons of Swedenborg's style and reads like a well-written adventure. Having the secret organization Kant standing in his way was a nice addition. The handwriting of the notes in the margin belongs to your grandfather, by the way. Huh? I had no idea he was into that sort of thing. He had a great sense of humor. I really miss him. Alco seemed nostalgic over her now deceased grandfather. He just contacted you this last summer, didn't he? Do we really have to go there? Why can't dead stay dead? Alco sighed and laid back on the sofa. The soft cushions caved in under her weight. As I was saying, Alice shot a glance at Alco. Her body buried in the sofa remained as still as a corpse. It was clear Alco had tuned out the conversation. Alice silently chastised her with a look. The more she thought about it, the less important the events of the day seemed to become. If she just ignored Alice, the conversation would end there. They would eventually get up and leave, today's mistake unresolved for another day. However, whoops, that's not the kind of person Aoko Ozaki was. Yeah, what is it? She asked, still laying down. It's upsetting that you failed today. Like I said, I'm thinking about it. I need to focus on becoming a full-fledged mage before thinking about school. I know that. I hope you do. The coldness in her voice made Aoko gnash her teeth. She knew that Alice wanted to say. She knew better than anyone. The veneer she wore for school was different than the way she lived at home. While it could be called hiding in plain sight, Alice thought it was silly. And what the silence told her was, make up your mind already, I know. Today's failure was not a colossal one. She just happened to upset the delicate balance between her home and school lives, chasing one at the expense of the other. And yet, that careless mistake was a clear sign of Aoko's lack of commitment. This doesn't concern Alice. It's my decision to make. She had only known for sure for the last year and a half, but she had a hunch for as long as she could remember. Make the choice and the day will come. It was little wonder that her morals and conscience had been stripped away. Aoko pushed herself back up. She was met by Alice's cold beauty and wordless gaze. Okay, Alice, we can do it next week. That work for you? As long as it works for you. Aoko could not help but shake her head, feeling like she was hearing something similar for the second time that day. Even in the comfort of her own, she couldn't banish thoughts of that country boy from her mind earlier. I'll let you set it up then. That's still beyond my abilities. Should we do it at the park? Sure. The line there is suitable enough. But what about the other thing? Isn't that a more urgent concern? It depends on the conditions. I'll let you know if there are any changes to the woods. After that brief exchange, Alice returned her attention to the book on her lap. Shop talk was over. Now, they could return to their normal relationship as roommates. Aoko grabbed the remote and turned on the TV. Since Alice was busy reading, Aoko decided to tune in to a variety show that had already started. Alice started to speak, but suddenly cut herself off. One of her delicate hands raised to her mouth. She would always cut herself off the second she realized she was about to say something trivial. Sometimes her self-restraint would hit too late, and she would make a gesture like the one she was making now. It occurred to Alco that the sound her cute little roommate made just now was different than the what she blurted in times past. What is it? Alco turned down the volume on the TV. Her intense eyes lit up like those of a mischievous cat. It's nothing really, but what? Alice looked away bashfully, not knowing if she could bring it up or not. It was at times like these that her expression carried real warmth and surprising charm. If he could see her in this moment, Alice's father would have to admit that her name suited her perfectly. It's just that I saw something strange on my way home and wanted to tell someone about it. Alco nodded, beckoning her to continue. It's silly, really, but I just can't make sense of it no matter how much I think about it. Alco, do you have any idea why a man-sized cat would be riding around town delivering meals to people? For a second, Alco thought Alice was trying and failing miserably to make a joke again. One would think that about anyone, really. But she seemed completely serious. Even if Alice's sense of humor fell flat for Alco, this story already sounded more fanciful than Alice's usual attempt at jokes. Alco concluded that her roommate was talking about something she had actually seen. There are a few things off about that. Maybe we should break it down. Let's not. Even I can think of a few mundane explanations. I'm just asking because I can't figure out why somebody would do that. Maybe it's as simple as someone dressing up in a finely crafted cat suit to deliver food for a restaurant. I'm more worried about the person doing it than their reasons, personally. Alice nodded tentatively at her words. But whatever does it for them, I guess. In a world with people like us and weirdos that live like mountain hermits, there's no telling what kinds of freaks are out there. I personally would have just gone up to them and asked them what they were doing. Alice's gaze drifted at that. A delivery cat riding through neighborhoods in the evening sounds like something straight out of a fantasy story. Hey, what should we do for dinner tonight? Speaking of delivery, maybe we should order in. Alco loved getting takeout, and her face glowed as she spoke. They had no hard rules for dinner, but if one of them was in the mood to cook, they made it a point to make enough for two. At the very worst, this meant entire weeks without dinner, but the two of them agreed that this was the system that worked best for them. Whether they found cooking to be too much effort or simply liked ordering out, nights like this one were a common occurrence, much to the chagrin of the restaurants of Misaki Town. Delivering to the mansion meant coming all the way up to the top of this hill, the source of their disgruntlement. It still before 8, so we're good. I'm really in the mood for kongetsu tonight. I haven't had their tsukimi soba in ages. The Hungry Student Council president took out their mini menus and excitedly looked for anything that stood out. Alice casually responded without sparring so much as a glance. Sorry, but I've already had dinner. With those words, Alco froze. All deliveries required a minimum of 2 items, so she was out of luck without an accomplice. Cruel society had decided it couldn't be bothered to deliver to a princess who only ordered a single serving of food. Incidentally, to counteract orders from the Hilltop Mansion, the restaurants had declared the minimum number of orders will be 3 starting next year. Alco and Alice were still in the dark to this fiendish change in direction. Traitor, is that why you were late getting back? Between the bus ride and the walk, the trip home takes only 20 minutes. I should have known something was up when you didn't get home before 5 o'clock. Unfortunately for Alco, she had been too out of it to even remember that she was the one who'd fallen asleep. Talk about Ice Queen. I thought it was clear that if either of us got food, we would bring enough home for the other person. Didn't I bring back something for you when I ate out last time? It was unknown how serious Alco was being, but she was visibly angry. She had already woken up hungry that morning, and from the time she was called into school until now, she had consumed nothing but tea. It was a small miracle that her stomach was not growling. She knew it was her own fault, but she persisted, wanting to get revenge on Alice for scolding her earlier. By last time, you mean the last time you went into the city and ate sushi, but only came back with a plastic bag full of convenience store food? That time, Alco had kicked a hornet's nest. So what? It was better than nothing, wasn't it? There are times when you'd be better off saying nothing at all. Alice's icy gaze pierced right through her. Alco had certainly crossed the line by going on and on about how the sushi circled around the restaurant while Alice ate her convenience store meal. But new things fascinated her, and she couldn't contain her curiosity towards the conveyor belt sushi shops that started popping up at the time. They were nothing short of miraculous. Even honesty can be a sin given the right circumstances. Fine, I get it. Does this at least mean we're even now? Alice went back to her book without so much as recognizing the question. The fact that she did not confirm it made Alco anxious. Well, today has been a total disaster. I guess I'll just whip up something in the kitchen. She stood up, announcing her intent to know when in particular. She stood up, announcing her intent to no one in particular. Oh, I almost forgot to ask, where did you end up eating anyway? Alice's hand froze on her current page. She suddenly shut the book she was reading and stood up as if at wit's end. She walked across the drawing room with her book in hand. When she reached the door, she stopped and turned towards Alco. You really want to know? Sure. Alco nodded timidly, cowed by Alice's sudden vigor. Alice continued in her matter-of-fact way. The cat gave me one of his leftover deliveries. And with that brief response, she left the room. So I got a trophy. It doesn't have to be normal. Download/copy not completed. Download copy complete. I'm wondering what okay, so they must have like inherent bookmarks, which is good and I appreciate, and really is like a perfect segue into the end of this video, because my voice was getting raspy, and it was kind of apparent from like the beginning that no, I actually might get some water, especially since it's over. I'll be back because I kind of want to explain this. And I might have to get something to drink next time I do this. I don't know, maybe tea or something, but I appreciate the fact that they have like inherent bookmarks for people who may not, like, I didn't, from the time I started the game, I didn't pause to see if there was a way to kind of essentially, bookmark, or it's called a bookmark in this game, but in any other game, any kind of checkpoint, right? Like, it's the same, probably a more familiar term to people who play, games in general. But I do appreciate that's in here. The next time I do this, I probably will try and at least have something to drink, relatively close to me, so I can drink it while I'm playing without kind of disrupting the video. Because I think, assuming this video clip gets saved along with the other two that I think are already in my capture gallery, I'm thinking this should be like pretty easy to put together in a pretty watchable video. The only difference I'll make going into it next time I get to doing something like this is, probably have something to drink, but I think the pacing will be the same. And I don't know, I think maybe just having something to drink would help best. Excuse me. But before I end this video, there's a couple things I want to talk about, mainly as it pertains to, like, just recently the Gundam streams. Ever since me kind of discovering like the truest saber skills, everything that came after that was just something that I kind of, as someone who plays games, and typically after you complete a game, there's like a new game plus, and that evolved into hard mode, which evolved into the GP30S Stamen, 03S Stamen. But I think it worked out best that everything that came after the truest saber video skills showcase with the Z Gundam, C Gundam. I'm really glad those turned out to be streams, because it allowed me to play it more comfortably, as if I was just streaming it, which is what I did. But I think the gameplay turned out to be a little bit sharper, and to be quite honest, it would have been impossible to try to even make something given everything that I was trying to get done. And I think it makes for a more watchable kind of like video, in contrast to maybe some of the other videos that are especially videos in the EFF playlist, because like those were streams at one point as well, before I turned them into videos that I then did a voiceover over. But it's still nice that they're kind of streams in that way, and I hope people. I have no idea. I mean, I've gone back and watched. I mean, I'm sure over time, just like all my other videos, I'll get a chance to see them. But I had no idea that was going to be the case, and I tried my best to kind of speak over some of the earlier videos, and I don't want people to think that I was streaming because I was being like inconsiderate in the least bit. It was just it's just really how things played out, and I think that is what it is. Speaking of Gundam, though, I do think I actually might head back into that game, assuming I'm able to complete this. I don't know how long it is. I haven't gotten any indication that we were in like a new chapter or anything, but with this bookmark, it's clear that there's times that the game would like you to stop. So that's what I did. But with respect to, assuming I'm able to maybe complete this in the near future, I will be probably heading back into SD Gundam Battle Alliance. Just to kind of tease what that video, the final stream with me streaming that game would be about. It's I have a feeling, so like in SD Gundam Battle Alliance, everything I've done this far has been centered around the idea of a full beam saber, meaning when I was grinding out the Shuddering Mountain Part 1, when I first ever picked that game up and was playing with the Easy 8, it was just playing in that city over and over again as I was equipping and unequipping ranged parts in contrast to other parts, and noticing that things are changing. And then, of course, Gundam Latreia itself played a massive role in just confirming kind of what I thought I was seeing. Is kind of what sparked the very first upload of the full beam saber build. But everything that's come out since then, it's all centered around the idea of a full beam saber, right? So, but I can tell you from just my experience playing, I'm not sure how much of this you'll be able to pick up on unless you kind of watch those videos really like intimately, but like in contrast to the idea of a full beam saber is the idea of like the Principality of Zeon. So how that's reflected in SD Gundam Battle Alliance is you'll see kind of what I did with the Easy 8 and the full beam saber video. that's the only EFF Gundam I know that can kind of do something similar. But like the idea of walking through bullets, and they'll sustain damage, but it won't stop their Gundam's movement. And you see that a lot throughout the game. And some Gundams, I'm not sure how much. I think most times if you're using a full beam saber, it'll stagger the enemies. But like especially bosses of the sort, they'll. It's almost like this idea of like pride, right? Like, the AFF pilots traditionally have like beam sabers and shields and assault rifles, whereas like it's like the Principality of Xeon. It's like their weapon is the idea of them just being this, just like not the idea of not succeeding to like the idea of failure, kind of, and that's reflected through the different characters on that side as well. But like you'll see that in the game, and I liked a video on my channel of someone. It's a Z Gundam boss. I think that's on hard because it's level 100, but someone's using a Banshee Gundam, and they're glowing red and have black. But he's fighting the Z Gundam, and they're both like attacking without their movements being disrupted. That's another way that the kind of Principality of Xeon is reflected in just that game, in contrast to the different beam sabers that the other Gundams have. But I'm bringing that up because it's a thing that the enemy AI can do, and it's something that if you mod correctly, and I believe if you find the right chips, that you can do as a player, just if you want to play that way, right? Let's just say like you want to, run through the game with the Gundam Epion without, you're going to take damage, but you might be able to be impervious to just stagger. That's again the whole idea of the Principality of Xeon. But like, I'm thinking what I'm gonna do to kind of, and I'm not sure if it'll even work, but I think I'm gonna try to like play that game with the Z Gundam. I don't know what level my current Z Gundam is at. I think it's at level 80. I think if I have the option, I'm gonna erase everything, like all the progress, all the capital, and everything that I spent to get that Z Gundam to level 80. I'm going to erase it and start over while straight up just like investing in HP, and however far that gets me, I'm going to see if I can run Flash of Fate at a comparable level to 30, at or around level 37. Or I don't know. I mean, hopefully I can like level up my HP to the point where like, I don't know, I don't know. I'm just going to fool around with the game. I think that there's other ways. I think there's a way I can kind of like do a final, I guess the long and short of where I'm trying to go with this is I'm trying to do Flash of Fate one last time with a full Sakura / Z Gundam, and the only way I'm going to start it at level 0, however far HP will get me, and if it's not anywhere close to level 37, then I'll pick some other stats maybe that I think that'll make him impervious to stagger, and hopefully it could have like 4 slots open, enough for me to equip the Sakura / skills, which would be 3 out of the 4 potential part slots, and 1 for the beam saber part, and then run that mission and see if I'm not impervious to taking damage, and even if I am still staggering to the enemy's effects, which that's just that's wishful thinking on my part, it would still be a slowed up, Z Gundam versus Z Gundam fight, which might be one of my favorite videos on, my channel thus far. I mean, with just this moveset and him having 2 beam sabers, when I first saw the Z Gundam, I thought it was a joke, to be completely honest, until I kind of saw it in game and other people fighting it. And I don't know, because like, there are Gundams where, especially in this SD Gundam Battle Alliance, where you're like, this is clearly a Gundam that is kind of like more on the shameful side in terms of just its relationship to other Gundams. But that's what I thought the Z Gundam fell into until I played with it, and it was a really refreshing experience. And like I said, if me kind of erasing all my progress on my current Z Gundam, which is at level 80, and restarting it with just straight investing in HP doesn't make me impervious to stagger, then I'm still gonna run it probably at least one more time, just as a final goodbye to that game with a hopefully full Sakura / Z Gundam, which is a culmination of everything thus far. And all that means is it's going to be the traditional fight, but we'll both be moving a little bit slower. And assuming I can have the beam saber part, it'll be like the truest version of a beam saber that I've played with yet, if not comparable to everything that you're already seeing. So, I kind of want to end it with that. But if I'm able to do this again, I'll probably give another update on the, that whole thing to begin with. But I did want to put that out there because I know the Gundam stuff can be a lot, and I don't really have another outlet to, give an update like this. So I didn't want to take advantage of just this time in games. If you're not familiar, I actually used to do this in the past when I was playing older games. Just try to give like a heads up on like, what I'm doing at least, or trying to do. But bring a little bit of that back. I'm assuming since the bookmark kicked me out of the game that it saved my progress. I do think there was something that popped up kind of mentioning that the game was saved. So I'm going to assume that it was. I need to think about how to end this. I do this every time I make a video. I have to... Okay, I'm going to stop the audio and let the game run. Okay. Yeah, so that's the Gundam stuff. I'll probably give another update on that. And I'm going to try to make another one of these in the not too distant future, assuming this doesn't take as long as Meito Anomalies to make. I'm not sure if it was something on the back end or what with that game, but it took incredibly long to render those videos. And I'm not sure if that's, what. I mean, it was kind of just the fact. And even when I tried to delete those files, like I tried to delete the folder in its entirety. This is for Meito Anomalies. And the folder wouldn't delete. And like some message came up saying I needed admin permission, which I think maybe with all my time dealing in computers have seen like once. Like, even in high school, which is probably where I remember seeing it. I really don't remember seeing anything like that in recent memory. But so I started freaking out after I saw that Meito Anomalies was completed. So I tried like to delete the folder, and then I was going to go in the recycle bin and delete it. Not that I'm trying to like destroy evidence. It's just the videos were created. So when that's oftentimes the case, I like to get it off, the computer. And when I was trying to do that for Meito Anomalies, it was telling me I needed admin permission, which, again. So I had to go into the folder and delete the videos, long story short, and then delete the folder, and then I deleted all that in the recycle bin. But yeah, Meito Anomalies was actually a fun game. I hope people can enjoy that. I'm really actually kind of happy I'm able to do an update in a video like this, because especially with some of the stuff going on, it's just nice to give like an update like this. But yeah, Mates Anomalies was fun. Hope people can enjoy that game. It was kind of, I mean, it was fun. I highly encourage people to go, like, I mean, check that stuff out if you're into it. Even from just like the first video, like getting ready, thinking I'm gonna make it, and then it ultimately never uploading, and then the whole deletion process, like it did kind of give off like a Metallic Rouge vibe from just the gameplay experience and ultimately making those videos. But yeah, hopefully I can do this again in the future, and I'm glad I was able to make this one. I have to remember at the stop the audio and let the game run. Okay, yeah, so thanks.